The snow fell thick and silent over Mayfair that Christmas Eve of 1817, transforming London into something almost beautiful, almost forgiving. Ellis Wynne Harrowmere stood at the edge of Lady Pemberton's ballroom, watching the festivities unfold before her like a play in which she had no part. The chandeliers blazed with 1,000 candles, their light reflecting off silk gowns and jeweled tiaras, off champagne glasses raised in laughter she would never share. She had learned in the 3 years since Charles died to make herself small, to stand where the shadows gathered at the periphery of grand rooms, to smile politely when spoken to, but never to impose her presence where it might prove uncomfortable. A young widow was a curiosity at best, a scandal at worst, particularly one whose husband had died under circumstances the ton preferred not to examine too closely. The orchestra struck up a waltz, and couples began to form across the polished floor. Ellis Wynne watched them with the detachment of someone observing a ritual in which she would never again participate. She was 24 years old, and her dancing days were over. Society had decided this for her, and she had accepted it with the same resignation she had accepted everything else that followed Charles's death. "You look as though you're attending a funeral rather than a Christmas ball." The voice came from beside her, warm and unexpectedly kind. Ellis Wynne turned to find an older woman regarding her with intelligent eyes that seemed to see far more than was comfortable. She was perhaps 60, dressed in deep burgundy silk that spoke of wealth without ostentation, her silver hair arranged in an elaborate style that had been fashionable a decade ago and somehow transcended the whims of current taste. "Forgive me," Ellis Wynne said quickly. "I didn't mean to appear morose. Lady Pemberton's ball is lovely. It's dreadfully dull, and we both know it." The woman smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her austere features. "I'm Morcanthe Ravenshaw, and you are the young woman everyone is pretending not to stare at." Heat flooded Ellis Wynne's cheeks. "I should not have come. I thought perhaps enough time had passed, but I see now I was mistaken. Time is an insufficient remedy for the sins society chooses to remember." Lady Morcanthe moved closer, her voice dropping to a more intimate register. "Tell me, my dear, what precisely have you done that warrants such determined ostracism?" The directness of the question startled Ellis Wynne into honesty. "I married for love rather than advantage. My husband was a second son with a modest income and large debts. When he died, I was left with nothing but his name, and the ton's conviction that I had somehow engineered the entire affair for my own benefit." "And had you?" "No." The word came out harder than Ellis Wynne intended. "I loved Charles, perhaps foolishly, perhaps unwisely, but genuinely. His death nearly destroyed me." Lady Morcanthe studied her for a long moment, and Ellis Wynne had the unsettling sensation of being evaluated according to criteria she could not fathom. Then the older woman nodded, as if satisfied with what she had found. "Come with me," Lady Morcanthe said, taking Ellis Wynne's hand with surprising firmness. "Where are we going?" "To remedy an injustice." Before Ellis Wynne could protest, she found herself being led across the ballroom floor. Conversations stuttered and died in their wake. Fans snapped open to hide whispered commentary. Ellis Wynne felt every eye in the room fix upon her, with an intensity that made her skin prickle. But Lady Morcanthe moved forward with the absolute confidence of someone long accustomed to deference. They stopped before a man standing near the orchestra, his back to the room as he spoke with the conductor. He was tall, his dark hair slightly too long for current fashion, his evening clothes impeccably tailored but worn with the ease of someone who never considered his appearance. When he turned at Lady Morcanthe's approach, Ellis Wynne felt her breath catch. She knew him, of course. Everyone in London knew Magnus Ravenshaw, Duke of Thornwick. He was 32 years old and had held his title for a decade, ever since his father's death from a riding accident. In that time, he had transformed the duchy's holdings from respectable to formidable, had served in diplomatic missions to Vienna and Paris, and had maintained a reputation for probity so absolute it bordered on the intimidating. He was also, despite the annual parade of hopeful mothers pushing their daughters before him, resolutely unmarried. "Mother," he said, and there was both affection and wariness in his tone. "What are you plotting?" "Nothing untoward." Lady Morcanthe's smile was entirely too innocent. I simply wish to introduce you to Miss Harrowmere, or rather Mrs. Harrowmere, though I understand she prefers her maiden name these days. The Duke's grey eyes moved to Eliswyn, and she felt the full weight of his attention settle upon her. It was not unkind, that look, but it was thorough and unnervingly perceptive. "Mrs. Harrowmere," he said, bowing slightly. "I regret we have not been introduced before. We have not moved in the same circles, Your Grace." Eliswyn kept her voice steady, despite the curious crowd pressing closer. An oversight that should be corrected. Lady Morcanthy's hand tightened on Eliswyn's. "Why don't you dance with my son?" The suggestion fell into the ballroom like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock through the assembled guests. Eliswyn heard someone gasp. Somewhere a woman laughed, a high, cruel sound that cut through the music. "Lady Morcanthy," Eliswyn began, desperate to extract herself before this kindness transformed into a greater humiliation. "I couldn't possibly—" "It would be my honor," the Duke said. The simplicity of his response silenced the rising murmur of commentary. He extended his hand to Eliswyn, his expression betraying nothing of what he might be thinking. She stared at that offered hand as if it were a trap, which perhaps it was. To accept would be to step back into society's scrutiny. To refuse would be to insult both the Duke and his mother. Lady Morcanthy released Eliswyn's hand, giving her a small push toward her son. "Go on, my dear. Show them all what fools they've been." Eliswyn placed her hand in the Duke's. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady, and he led her onto the floor as the waltz swelled around them. She was aware of every stare, every whisper, every raised eyebrow and scandalized expression. But when the Duke's hand settled at her waist and they began to move, the rest of the ballroom seemed to recede. "You don't have to do this," Eliswyn said quietly, looking up at him. "Your mother means well, but this will only fuel gossip. Let them talk." His voice was measured, almost indifferent. "Do you know why my mother brought you to me?" "I confess I have no idea." "Because she believes I spend too much time concerned with duty and not enough with living." A slight smile touched his mouth. "She may be correct." They turned, moving through the steps with an ease that surprised Eliswyn. The Duke was an excellent dancer, his lead firm but not overbearing, his movements precise without being mechanical. She had not danced since Charles died, and she had forgotten the peculiar intimacy of it, the way a waltz created its own private world within the public space. "Your mother is remarkable," Eliswyn said. "She doesn't seem to care what people think." "Oh, she cares. She simply refuses to let their opinions dictate her actions." The Duke navigated them around a slower couple, a trait I apparently failed to inherit. "I think you're doing rather well at the moment." "Am I?" He looked at her with sudden intensity. "Tell me, Mrs. Harrowmere, what brings you to Lady Pemberton's ball tonight? From what little I know of your circumstances, this cannot be a comfortable environment." The question was too direct, too honest, and it pierced through all her careful defenses. I thought perhaps if I proved I could still participate in society, could still behave correctly, people might eventually forget why they shunned me in the first place. I see now how naive that was. Or perhaps you're simply braver than most. The waltz was ending, but the Duke made no move to release her. "May I call on you tomorrow?" Eliswyn missed a step, stumbling slightly. The Duke steadied her, his hand tightening at her waist. "Why would you do that?" "Because I find I would like to continue our conversation in a setting less prone to eavesdropping." He guided her toward the edge of the floor as the music faded. "Unless you have objections." She had 1,000 objections, each more sensible than the last. A duke did not call on a woman of dubious reputation. A duke certainly did not call on a penniless widow whom society had collectively decided to forget. Whatever motivated his offer, it could only lead to complications she was not prepared to handle. "I live in a very modest house in Bloomsbury," Eliswyn said, testing him. 3 rooms above a milliner's shop. Then I shall endeavour not to arrive in my most ostentatious carriage." The Duke bowed over her hand. "Good evening, Mrs. Harrowmere. Thank you for the dance." He released her and walked away, back straight, seemingly unconcerned with the whispers that followed his departure. Lady Morcanthy appeared at Eliswyn's side, her expression one of satisfaction. "Well done, my dear. You didn't faint or flee, which is more than many would have managed under such scrutiny. "What have you done?" Eliswyn asked, not unkindly. "Why did you single me out?" "Because I recognized something in you that I once possessed myself, the courage to love unwisely and the strength to survive its consequences." Lady Morcanthe patted Eliswyn's arm. "And because my son needs someone to remind him that life is more than ledgers and responsibilities, whether he realizes it yet or not." She swept away before Eliswyn could respond, leaving her alone once more at the edge of the ballroom. But something had shifted. People were still staring, but the quality of their attention had changed. Curiosity had replaced condemnation, speculation had tempered scorn. By dancing with her, the Duke of Thornwick had made a statement, though what precisely he had declared remained unclear. Eliswyn left the ball shortly after, walking home through snow-covered streets rather than spending money on a hackney. Her thin cloak provided little protection against the December cold, but she welcomed the discomfort. It anchored her, kept her from floating away on the strange exhilaration that threatened to overwhelm her better judgment. The Duke would not call tomorrow. He would wake and remember his position, his obligations, his reputation. Whatever impulse had motivated his invitation would fade in the cold light of day, and she would return to her familiar obscurity. It was better this way, safer. She climbed the narrow stairs to her rooms, lit a single candle to conserve oil, and sat by the window looking out at the sleeping city. Snow continued to fall, muffling sound, transforming the familiar into something strange and new. Eliswyn pressed her hand against the cold glass and allowed herself to remember what it felt like to dance, to be seen, to matter. Just for tonight, she would permit herself that small indulgence. Tomorrow, she would be sensible again. The Duke's knock came at precisely 11 o'clock the following morning. Eliswyn heard it through the thin walls of her rooms and convinced herself she had imagined it. No one of consequence called on her. Her few visitors were limited to the clergyman's wife, who occasionally brought charitable baskets, and Mrs. Henderson from the milliner's shop below, who sometimes invited her for tea. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Eliswyn checked her reflection in the small mirror above her washstand. Her dress was 3 years old, carefully maintained but obviously unfashionable. Her dark hair was arranged simply, pinned back in a style that required no maid's assistance. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman of genteel birth reduced to genteel poverty. She opened the door to find not the Duke, but a footman in Ravenshaw livery, holding a large basket covered with white cloth. "Mrs. Harrowmere," the footman bowed. "His Grace the Duke of Thornwick presents his compliments and requests the honour of your company for a drive this afternoon." Eliswyn stared at the basket. "What is this?" "His Grace thought you might enjoy breakfast first. He will return at 2 o'clock if that time proves convenient." The footman set the basket inside her door, bowed again, and departed before Eliswyn could formulate a response. She stood staring at the basket for a long moment before curiosity overcame propriety. Inside she found fresh bread still warm from the oven, butter, jam, cold ham, cheese, hothouse grapes, and a pot of tea wrapped in towels to keep it hot. A card rested on top, written in a firm, masculine hand. "I realized after leaving last night that I had been presumptuous in inviting myself to call. Please accept this small offering as both apology and breakfast." Mr. Eliswyn sank into her chair, the card clutched in her hand. This was real. The Duke had not forgotten or reconsidered. He fully intended to call on her, to be seen in her company, to continue whatever bizarre social experiment his mother had initiated at Lady Pemberton's ball. She should refuse. She should send a polite note declining his invitation and retreat back into the safety of obscurity. Instead, she found herself eating the best breakfast she'd had in months, while mentally cataloguing her limited wardrobe, trying to determine which dress would be least humiliating to wear in the Duke's presence. At precisely 2 o'clock, his carriage arrived. Not his most ostentatious one, true to his word, but still a vehicle of obvious quality, pulled by matched greys that drew appreciative glances from passers-by. The Duke himself descended to hand her in, and Eliswyn caught Mrs. Henderson watching from the shop window below, her expression one of frank astonishment. "Where are we going?" Eliswyn asked as they pulled away from the curb. "Hyde Park, initially. I thought we might drive for a while and talk without the pressure of walls and furniture and teacups." The Duke settled back against the seat, studying her. "You look apprehensive." "I'm confused," Eliswyn admitted. "Last night I thought perhaps you were simply being kind, indulging your mother's whim. But this—" She gestured at the carriage, at the careful attention of the driver and footman, at the quality of the vehicle itself. "This suggests something more deliberate." "It is deliberate." The Duke's expression was serious. "I will be honest with you, Mrs. Harrowmere. I have spent the past 10 years managing my estates, fulfilling obligations, and generally behaving as a duke should behave. I have been responsible, practical, and utterly predictable. Those sound like admirable qualities. They're suffocating qualities." He said it without heat, but with absolute conviction. "Last night, when my mother dragged you across that ballroom, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. I saw someone who had risked everything for love and survived its loss. Someone who came to a ball where she knew she would be unwelcome simply because she refused to surrender her right to exist in society. Or someone too stubborn to accept reality," Eliswyn said quietly. "Stubborn or brave. Perhaps they're the same thing." They had entered Hyde Park now, the carriage wheels crunching on gravel paths lined with bare trees. "I want to know you better. I want to understand what gives someone that kind of courage. And if society condemns you for associating with me, then perhaps I'll finally understand what it means to live according to my own conscience rather than others' expectations." The Duke smiled, and it transformed his austere features into something almost boyish. "My mother has been telling me for years that I need to be less concerned with propriety and more concerned with happiness. I'm beginning to think she may be right." They drove in silence for a while, the winter afternoon cold but bright, sunlight glinting off snow that still clung to the park's lawns and trees. Other carriages passed them, their occupants craning to see who sat beside the Duke of Thornwick. Tomorrow the gossip columns would be full of speculation. By evening every drawing room in Mayfair would be buzzing with theories and conjecture. "Tell me about your husband," the Duke said eventually. The request surprised Eliswyn. People didn't ask about Charles. They whispered about him, speculated about him, wove elaborate theories about his death and her involvement, but no one actually asked her to speak of him directly. "Charles was kind," she began, choosing her words carefully. "He was a second son with no prospects beyond what he could earn through his own efforts, and he was terrible at earning anything. He had schemes and plans and ideas, none of which ever came to fruition. We were desperately poor even before we married, and I knew it and I chose him anyway." "Because you loved him." "Because I loved him," Eliswyn confirmed. "His family disowned him for marrying beneath them. My family disowned me for marrying a fortune hunter. We had nothing but each other, and for a year that was enough." "How did he die?" The question was direct but not unkind. Eliswyn looked out at the park, at the other carriages passing by, at the world continuing its ordinary movements while she delved into extraordinary pain. "He went to meet someone about an investment opportunity. A sure thing, he called it, though nothing was ever sure with Charles. He was supposed to return by evening, but he didn't. They found him the next morning in an alley near the docks. He'd been robbed and beaten. The magistrate said it was a common enough crime in that part of London. But you don't believe that?" Eliswyn turned to look at the Duke, startled by his perception. "I think he was lured there deliberately. I think someone promised him money knowing he was desperate for it, knowing he would take foolish risks to get it. But I have no proof and no one cared enough to investigate further. A second son married to a woman without connections makes for an unimportant corpse." The Duke was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "You blame yourself. I married a man who couldn't support me and then resented him for his failures. I pushed him to find opportunities, to take chances, to prove himself. If I had been content with poverty, he might still be alive. If society had been less cruel, you both might have had a chance." The Duke's hand moved as if to touch hers, then retreated. "The fault lies not with you, but with a system that demands we marry for advantage, rather than affection." "You sound like a radical." "Perhaps I'm becoming one." He smiled again, that surprising expression that made him seem younger and more accessible. "My mother will be delighted." They continued their drive until the winter sun began to sink toward the horizon, turning the sky shades of gold and pink that seemed too beautiful for the season. The Duke spoke of his estates, of his travels abroad, of his frustrations with Parliament and his hopes for reform. Eliswyn found herself responding with an honesty she hadn't exercised in years, speaking of her childhood, her brief marriage, her attempts to build some kind of life from the ruins Charles had left behind. When they returned to Bloomsbury, the Duke handed her down from the carriage himself. "May I call again?" "Your Grace." "Magnans," he corrected gently. "If we're to be friends, you should use my name." "We cannot be friends. You're a duke and I'm someone I find fascinating." He said it simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Tomorrow, same time?" Eliswyn knew she should refuse, knew this could only end in disappointment or scandal or both. But standing there in the fading light, her hand still warm from his touch, she found herself nodding. "Tomorrow," she agreed. He drove away, leaving her standing on the street while Mrs. Henderson and half the neighborhood watched from their windows. Eliswyn climbed the stairs to her rooms, feeling both exhilarated and terrified, knowing that whatever had begun last night at Lady Pemberton's ball, it showed no signs of ending any time soon. The Duke called every day for a week. Sometimes they drove in Hyde Park. Sometimes they walked through the British Museum, examining antiquities while arguing about history and philosophy. Once he took her to the theatre, sitting in his private box while society gasped and speculated below. Lady Morcanthe appeared on the fourth day, arriving in her own carriage to collect Eliswyn for tea at Ravenshaw House. The mansion was everything Eliswyn expected, elegant, imposing, filled with generations of accumulated wealth and taste. But Lady Morcanthe led her not to a formal drawing room, but to a small, comfortable parlour overlooking the gardens. "I wanted to see how you were managing," Lady Morcanthe said, pouring tea into delicate china cups. "My son has a tendency toward intensity. Once he decides upon a course of action, he pursues it with single-minded determination. Is that what I am? A course of action?" "You are a revelation," Lady Morcanthe smiled. "I haven't seen Magnans this animated since before his father died. Whatever you're doing, please continue." "I'm not doing anything. We talk, that's all. About books and art and politics and—" Eliswyn stopped, realizing how much time she had spent in the Duke's company, how many hours of conversation had passed between them. "And you're falling in love with him." The words hung in the air between them. Eliswyn wanted to deny it, to laugh it off as an absurd suggestion, but Lady Morcanthe's eyes were too knowing, too kind. "It doesn't matter what I feel," Eliswyn said finally. "He's a duke. I'm a widow with no money, no family, and a reputation that makes me unsuitable for anything beyond charity cases and pity." "Magnans doesn't pity you." Lady Morcanthe set down her teacup. "Let me tell you something about my son. His father was a good man, but a rigid one. He believed absolutely in duty, in hierarchy, in maintaining the proper order of things. Magnans learned those lessons well, perhaps too well. For years he's been the perfect duke, the perfect son, the perfect example of aristocratic responsibility." "He still is." "No, my dear, he's becoming something better. He's becoming human." Lady Morcanthe leaned forward. "You've awakened something in him that I feared was lost. The capacity to choose his own path, rather than following the one laid out for him. Don't discourage that. Don't retreat because you think you're not good enough. You're exactly what he needs. And what he needs may destroy him." Eliswyn's voice was sharper than she intended. "Every time we're seen together, the gossip grows worse. People are saying terrible things about both of us. Eventually, that will damage his reputation, his standing, everything he's worked to build. Then let it burn." Lady Morcanthe's expression was fierce. "If his standing requires him to abandon people he cares about simply because society deems them unworthy, then it's not worth preserving. My son needs to learn that some things matter more than reputation." Their conversation was interrupted by a servant, announcing that the Duke had returned home. He appeared moments later, still in his riding clothes, his hair windblown and his colour high from exercise. "Mother," he said, bowing to Lady Morcanthe before turning to Eliswyn, "I didn't know you were coming today. If I had, I would have arranged to be here." "I came to steal your friend for tea," Lady Morcanthe said, rising. "But now that you're here, I'll leave you both to your conversation. Elliswyn, you must visit again soon. I find your company refreshing." She departed in a rustle of silk, leaving Elliswyn alone with the Duke. He crossed to the window, looking out at the winter gardens with an expression she couldn't read. "My mother approves of you," he said finally. "She rarely approves of anyone. She's concerned about you. She's always concerned about me. It's part of being a mother, I suppose." He turned back to face her. "I need to tell you something. There's a ball at Devonshire House next week, the most important social event of the Christmas season. I would like you to attend as my guest." Elliswyn felt the blood drain from her face. "That's impossible." "Why?" "Because I'm not welcome at Devonshire House. Because appearing there as your guest would create a scandal. Because—" She stopped, searching for words adequate to the magnitude of what he was suggesting. "Because you're afraid," the Duke said quietly. "Yes, I'm terrified." Elliswyn stood, needing to move. "Every day that you call on me, every time we're seen together, the gossip grows worse. People are saying I've seduced you, that I'm using you for money, that I'm no better than a courtesan. If I go to Devonshire House on your arm, they'll say I've completed my campaign to trap a duke." "Let them say it. You don't understand what you're risking. Your reputation, your position, are meaningless if I can't use them to defend someone who matters to me." The Duke crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "I'm not blind to the gossip, Elliswyn. I hear what they're saying about you, about us. But I refuse to let their narrow-mindedness dictate my actions. You deserve to attend balls. You deserve to dance and laugh and participate in society. And I want to be the one standing beside you when you do. This isn't about what I deserve. This is about what's practical, what's wise. I've been practical and wise for 10 years, and it's made me miserable." His grip tightened on her hands. "Please, come with me to Devonshire House. Let me show society that I choose you, that their opinions hold no power over my decisions." Elliswyn looked up at him, at the earnest intensity in his grey eyes, and felt something crack inside her chest. He meant it, every word. He would risk everything, his reputation, his standing, the respect of his peers, just to make a point about her worthiness. It was the most foolish, romantic, impossible gesture she had ever witnessed. "I don't have anything appropriate to wear," she said finally, her resistance crumbling. The Duke smiled. "That, at least, is a problem I can solve." The dress arrived 3 days before the Devonshire House ball, delivered by a nervous modiste and her assistant, who handled the layers of silk and lace as if they were transporting crown jewels. Elliswyn stared at the creation spread across her narrow bed, unable to reconcile its beauty with the shabby reality of her rooms. It was the color of winter midnight, a deep blue-black that shimmered with threads of silver when the light caught it properly. The bodice was fitted, designed to emphasize a woman's figure without crossing into impropriety. The skirt fell in elegant layers, each one edged with delicate embroidery that must have taken weeks to complete. Matching gloves, slippers, and a reticule completed the ensemble. "His Grace was very specific about the design," the modiste said, watching Elliswyn's reaction with professional interest. "He said you would need something that commanded respect while defying expectation." "It's too much," Elliswyn whispered. "I cannot possibly accept this." "You'll have to take that up with His Grace. My instructions were simply to ensure the fit was perfect." The modiste gestured to her assistant. "Shall we proceed with the fitting?" An hour later, Elliswyn stood before her small mirror trying to recognize herself. The dress transformed her from a woman society had forgotten into someone who demanded attention. The color brought out the luminous quality of her skin, made her dark eyes seem larger and more striking. The cut emphasized curves she had learned to hide beneath practical day dresses. She looked, she realized with a shock, beautiful. "His Grace has excellent taste," the modiste said with satisfaction. "You'll be the envy of every woman at Devonshire House." After the modiste departed, Elliswyn sat at her window wearing the dress, watching snow begin to fall again over London. The Duke had promised to collect her at 8 o'clock on the evening of the ball. She had approximately 72 hours to gather her courage for what would certainly be the most challenging night of her life. Mrs. Henderson appeared that evening with tea and an expression of barely contained excitement. "The whole street is talking about nothing else," she announced, settling into Elliswyn's single chair. "A duke courting one of my tenants. It's like something from a novel." "He's not courting me," Elliswyn corrected, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "We're friends." "Friends don't commission ball gowns that cost more than most people earn in a year." Mrs. Henderson's eyes sparkled. "Oh, don't look so worried, dear. I think it's wonderful. That young man needs someone to shake him out of his proper duke ways, and you're just the person to do it. I'm nobody, a widow living above a milliner's shop. You're someone who loved deeply and survived great loss. That's not nothing." Mrs. Henderson poured tea with practiced efficiency. "Now, tell me about this ball. What are you most worried about?" Elliswyn laughed despite herself. "Everything. The fact that I'll be walking into a room full of people who've spent 3 years pretending I don't exist, the certainty that my presence will cause a scandal, the knowledge that I'm risking the Duke's reputation for the sake of my own pride, and the possibility that you're falling in love with him." The question hung in the air. Elliswyn wrapped her hands around her teacup, seeking warmth against the chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "That most of all," she admitted quietly, "because I know how this story ends. Men like Magnan's Ravenshaw don't marry women like me. They may dance with us, drive with us, even defend us against society's cruelty. But in the end, duty wins. It always wins." "Perhaps this time it won't." Mrs. Henderson's voice was gentle. "Perhaps this time, love will be enough." The night of the ball arrived with the inevitability of dawn. Elliswyn spent the day in a state of barely controlled anxiety, alternating between rehearsing gracious responses to anticipated insults and seriously considering fleeing London entirely. When the Duke's carriage arrived at 8 o'clock, she nearly sent word that she was unwell. Instead, she descended the stairs in her midnight blue dress, her head high and her hands steady, despite the fear threatening to overwhelm her. The Duke waited at the bottom, resplendent in formal evening wear, his expression transforming when he saw her. "You're stunning," he said simply. "I'm terrified." "That makes 2 of us." He offered his arm, and she took it, drawing strength from the solid warmth of his presence. "But we'll face it together." The drive to Devonshire House was both too short and too long. Magnan spoke of inconsequential things: the weather, a new play at Covent Garden, improvements he was planning for his country estate, clearly trying to distract her from her mounting dread. Elliswyn appreciated the effort, even as she realized nothing could truly prepare her for what awaited. Devonshire House blazed with light, its windows glowing golden against the winter darkness. Carriages lined the street, disgorging guests in a glittering procession of silks and jewels. Elliswyn watched them ascend the stairs, laughing and chatting with the ease of people secure in their social position, and felt a wave of longing so intense it was almost painful. She had been one of them once. Before Charles, before scandal, before she learned how quickly society could turn its back on those who failed to meet its exacting standards. "We can leave," Magnan said quietly. "If this is too much, if you've changed your mind, we can simply drive away. I'll take you home and we'll find another way to make our point." Elliswyn looked at him, at the genuine concern in his grey eyes, at the way he held himself ready to defend her from whatever might come. In that moment, she understood that Mrs. Henderson had been right. She was falling in love with him, perhaps had already fallen, and that made what they were about to do both more meaningful and more dangerous. "No," she said firmly, "I won't run. I spent 3 years making myself invisible, accepting society's judgment as if I deserved it. Tonight I choose to be seen." The Duke smiled, an expression of such pride and admiration that Elliswyn felt her resolve strengthen. "Then let's give them something to see." They ascended the stairs together, Elliswyn's hand resting on Magnan's arm. The Duke and Duchess of Devonshire received them at the top, their surprise at seeing Elliswyn carefully concealed behind polite smiles. "Thornwick," the Duke of Devonshire said, shaking Magnan's hand, Delighted you could attend. And Mrs. Harrowmere, what a pleasant surprise." The words were courteous, but Elliswyn heard the question beneath them. "What are you doing here? By what right do you stand in my hallway?" "The pleasure is mine, Your Grace," Elliswyn said, matching his courtesy with her own. "Thank you for having me." They moved into the ballroom, and conversation stumbled, faltered, died. Heads turned. Fans snapped open. Whispers hissed through the assembled guests like wind through dry leaves. Elliswyn felt every eye in the room fix upon her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She had forgotten, in 3 years of invisibility, what it felt like to be the center of attention. To know that every word, every gesture, every expression was being evaluated and judged. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. Magnans guided her around the perimeter of the ballroom, acknowledging greetings with easy confidence. Some guests returned his pleasantries with genuine warmth. Others offered stiff nods before hurrying away, clearly uncomfortable being seen in conversation with the Duke and his scandalous companion. "You're doing beautifully," Magnans murmured. "Half the women here are jealous of your dress, and the other half are jealous of your composure." I'm screaming internally. "I know. So am I." He squeezed her hand gently. "Would you like some champagne? Alcohol makes most social obligations more bearable." Before she could respond, Lady Morcanthe appeared, resplendent in emerald silk, her expression one of fierce satisfaction. "There you both are. I was beginning to think you'd lost your nerve." She kissed her son's cheek before turning to Elliswyn. "That dress is perfection. Magnans, you have better taste than I gave you credit for. Mother, please try not to scandalize the entire room before we've been here 10 minutes. Where's the fun in that?" Lady Morcanthe linked her arm through Elliswyn's. "Come, my dear, let's introduce you to some people who aren't complete idiots." She proceeded to do exactly that, cutting through the crowd with the absolute authority of someone who had navigated society's complexities for decades. She introduced Elliswyn to reformers and radicals, to poets and philosophers, to people who cared more about ideas than propriety. Within an hour, Elliswyn found herself engaged in animated discussions about everything from Catholic emancipation to Lord Byron's latest scandal. "You're a natural," Lady Morcanthe said when they finally paused for breath. "I knew you would be. These are your people, Elliswyn, the ones who think rather than simply follow. But they're not my people. They're yours, and they're speaking to me because you brought me here. They're speaking to you because you're interesting. The introduction merely provided the opportunity." Lady Morcanthe snagged 2 glasses of champagne from a passing footman. "Now, drink this and relax. The worst is over." But the worst, as it turned out, was just beginning. The Duke of Worthington approached with 3 of his friends, all of them young men known for their dissolute behavior and cutting wit. Elliswyn recognized the danger immediately, saw the malicious glint in Worthington's eyes, but before she could extract herself, he was speaking. "Thornwick, old fellow, I must say you continue to surprise us all." Worthington's smile was sharp as broken glass. "First you dance with a nobody at Lady Pemberton's ball, then you parade her through Hyde Park, and now you bring her to Devonshire House. One almost wonders what your intentions might be." "My intentions are my own business," Magnans said quietly. Of course, but surely you can understand society's concern. Mrs. Harrowmere here has quite a history after all." Worthington turned to Elliswyn, his expression one of false sympathy. "How is widowhood treating you, my dear? I imagine it must be challenging, particularly given the circumstances of your husband's unfortunate death." "The Duke of Worthington is trying to bait you," Lady Morcanthe said calmly, her hand closing on Elliswyn's arm. "Don't give him the satisfaction of a response." "I'm merely making conversation," Worthington protested. "Surely there's no harm in asking after Mrs. Harrowmere's welfare, unless, of course, there's something about her past she prefers not to discuss." The implication hung in the air like poison. Elliswyn felt rage building in her chest, hot and bitter. But before she could unleash it, Magnans stepped forward, his expression transformed into something cold and dangerous. "I believe you owe Mrs. Harrowmere an apology." "An apology?" Worthington laughed. "For what? Acknowledging facts that everyone in this room already knows, that she married a fortune hunter who got himself killed chasing money, that she's now conveniently attached herself to the wealthiest unmarried peer in London. That's enough. Magnan's voice cut through the rising murmur of conversation. You will apologize to Mrs. Harrowmere, or you will answer to me. The threat was unmistakable. Worthington's smile faltered, his friends suddenly finding reasons to examine their shoes. Around them, the ballroom had gone silent, every guest straining to hear what would happen next. I meant no offense, Worthington said finally, his tone sullen. If Mrs. Harrowmere took my words amiss, I apologize. It was a non-apology, carefully worded to avoid genuine contrition, but Magnans accepted it with a curt nod. Worthington retreated, his friends trailing behind him, and gradually conversation resumed, though the damage had been done. The pleasant fiction that Eliswyn might be accepted had been shattered, replaced by the harsh reality that many in this room would never see her as anything but an interloper. We should leave, Eliswyn said quietly. This was a mistake. We're not leaving. Magnans took her hand, drawing her toward the center of the ballroom where couples were forming for the next dance. We're going to dance, and we're going to enjoy ourselves, and we're going to show everyone here that their opinions matter less than nothing. Magnans, dance with me. It wasn't a request. Eliswyn allowed herself to be led onto the floor as a waltz began, the same music that had played at Lady Pemberton's ball 3 weeks ago when this entire strange journey had begun. Magnans's hand settled at her waist, his other hand clasping hers, and they began to move. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I thought if I brought you here, if I showed society that I accepted you, they would follow my lead. I was naive. You were optimistic. There's a difference. Eliswyn looked up at him, seeing the frustration in his eyes. What Worthington said about me, about Charles, people have been saying things like that for 3 years. I've learned to bear it. You shouldn't have to bear it. None of this is your fault. Isn't it? The words came out more bitter than she intended. I chose to marry Charles, knowing what it would cost. I chose to love someone society deemed unworthy. Every consequence that followed was a direct result of my choices. Then society is wrong. Magnans pulled her slightly closer, bending the rules of proper dance distance. Listen to me, Eliswyn. What Worthington said tonight, what they all think, it's based on prejudice and rigid adherence to rules that serve no purpose beyond maintaining artificial hierarchies. You loved your husband. You suffered his loss. Those are human experiences, not moral failings. But they made me vulnerable. They made me... She stopped, unable to finish the thought. They made you real. His voice was fierce. Every other woman in this room has been carefully prepared to be a perfect ornament for society. They've been taught to hide their emotions, suppress their opinions, and present a facade of elegant emptiness. You're different. You've lived and loved and suffered, and it shows. That's not weakness. That's strength. The waltz swirled around them, and Eliswyn found herself caught in the intensity of his gaze, in the conviction of his words. She wanted to believe him, wanted to accept that her experiences had value rather than simply being sources of shame. But 3 years of isolation had taught her to distrust hope. What do you want from me? She asked finally. Why are you doing this? The question seemed to surprise him. His steps faltered slightly before he recovered, guiding them through a turn. When he spoke, his voice was careful, as if he were navigating treacherous ground. I want you to understand that you matter, that your presence in society has value beyond what others choose to recognize. He stopped, then seemed to come to a decision. I want you to consider the possibility that we might be more than friends. Eliswyn's breath caught. The ballroom seemed to recede, leaving just the two of them, moving through space to music she could no longer properly hear. You can't mean that. Why not? Because you're a widow, because you lack a fortune, because society disapproves. He smiled, an expression of such warmth that her heart ached. Those are precisely the reasons I should be cautious. They're also precisely the reasons I find myself drawn to you. You've taught me that there are things more important than duty and reputation. That love, real, passionate, complicated love, is worth whatever price society demands. Magnans, I can't... Eliswyn struggled to find words adequate to the enormity of what he was suggesting. You're a duke. You need to marry someone appropriate, someone who can give you heirs and manage your estates and represent your family properly. I can't be that person. I don't want that person. I want you. The waltz was ending, couples beginning to separate and drift toward the edges of the floor. Magnans held Eliswyn for a moment longer than propriety allowed, his hands warm through her gloves, his expression one of absolute certainty. Think about it, he said finally. That's all I ask. Think about the possibility that we might build something real together. He released her, offered his arm and led her from the floor. Eliswyn moved through the rest of the evening in a daze, responding to conversation automatically, while her mind raced through the implications of what Magnans had said. He wanted to court her, perhaps even marry her. It was madness. It was impossible. It was also the most tempting offer anyone had ever made. Lady Morcanthe appeared as the evening wound down, her expression one of barely suppressed excitement. "I saw you two dancing," she said to Eliswyn. "The way my son looked at you, I haven't seen that expression on his face since he was a boy. Whatever you said to each other, it's had quite an effect. He suggested we might be more than friends. Oh, thank God. I was beginning to think he'd never work up the courage." Lady Morcanthe squeezed Eliswyn's hand. "And what did you say?" "That it was impossible, that society would never accept it, that he needs someone appropriate for his position." All very sensible objections and utterly irrelevant. Lady Morcanthe's voice was brisk. "My dear girl, life is too short to make decisions based on what other people think is appropriate. If you care for my son, and I believe you do, then tell him so. Let the consequences be damned." Easy to say when you're not the one who will bear those consequences. "Who says I won't?" Lady Morcanthe's expression grew serious. "If Magnans chooses you, I'll support that choice regardless of what society thinks. Yes, there will be scandal. Yes, some doors will close, but others will open, and the life you build together will be yours, not something constructed according to other people's specifications." Magnans returned then, having secured their cloaks, and they departed Devonshire House into a night that had turned bitterly cold. The carriage ride back to Bloomsbury was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived at Eliswyn's building, Magnans walked her to her door, his hand warm against the small of her back. "Thank you for tonight," he said. "I know it was difficult." It was also illuminating. Eliswyn turned to face him, this man who had upended her careful isolation and shown her possibilities she'd thought lost forever. "Magnans, what you said on the dance floor, you don't have to answer now. Take whatever time you need." He lifted her hand, pressing a kiss to her knuckles through her glove. "I'll wait." He descended the stairs and returned to his carriage, leaving Eliswyn standing in her doorway with her heart pounding and her mind whirling. Inside her rooms, she removed the beautiful dress, hanging it carefully before sinking into her chair by the window. The question before her was simple in theory, but devastating in practice. Did she have the courage to risk everything one more time? To reach for happiness, knowing it might be snatched away? To trust that love could triumph over society's cruel judgment? She thought of Charles, of how loving him had cost her everything. She thought of the 3 years she'd spent in isolation, accepting society's verdict as if it were deserved. She thought of Magnans, of his fierce defense at Devonshire House, of the way he looked at her as if she mattered. And slowly, carefully, she began to consider the possibility that Lady Morcanthe might be right, that some things, some people, were worth the risk. The following morning brought both an unexpected visitor and an unwelcome development. The visitor was Lady Pemberton, who appeared at Eliswyn's door, looking simultaneously embarrassed and determined. "Mrs. Harrowmere, I hope you'll forgive the intrusion," she began, twisting her reticule nervously. "I wanted to speak with you about last night's ball. If you've come to scold me for attending, you're wasting your time." Eliswyn kept her voice level, despite the anxiety coiling in her stomach. "The Duke of Thornwick invited me, and I accepted. Whatever scandal that created is already done. I'm not here to scold you. I'm here to apologize." Lady Pemberton's words came out in a rush. At my Christmas ball, when Lady Morcanthe brought you to her son, I thought it was merely an amusing gesture. I didn't realize the Duke was genuinely interested in your company. Now, after last night, after seeing how he defended you against Worthington—" She stopped, gathering herself. "I've been unkind to you, Mrs. Harrowmere. Not actively cruel, but passively dismissive, which is perhaps worse. I wanted you to know that I regret that." Elliswyn stared at her, trying to process this unexpected contrition. "Why tell me this now?" "Because watching the Duke last night reminded me that there are more important things than maintaining social niceties. He risked his reputation to stand beside you. The least I can do is acknowledge that I've been wrong about you." Lady Pemberton set her reticule down. "I also wanted to warn you. Worthington is spreading rumors, terrible ones, about you and the Duke and your intentions toward him." "Of course he is." Elliswyn felt weary rather than surprised. "What's he saying?" "That you're a fortune hunter who's seduced the Duke into forgetting his obligations. That you're no better than—" Lady Pemberton stopped, clearly reluctant to continue. "Than a prostitute," Elliswyn finished. "That's not particularly original. People have been implying that for 3 years. But now they're saying it about the Duke of Thornwick as well. That he's been compromised by a woman of questionable morals. That his judgment has been impaired." Lady Pemberton's expression was grave. "The Duke of Worthington is calling for an inquiry into your late husband's death. He's suggesting there were suspicious circumstances that were never properly investigated." The words hit Elliswyn like a physical blow. She sank into her chair, her mind racing through the implications. If Worthington succeeded in raising questions about Charles's death, if he convinced people there was something sinister to investigate, it wouldn't matter that she was innocent. The speculation alone would destroy her, and it would destroy Magnan's as well. "I need to end this," she said quietly. "I need to stop seeing the Duke before this gets worse." "Is that what you want? Or what you think you should do?" Lady Pemberton's voice was surprisingly gentle. "Mrs. Harrowmere, I came here to apologize and to warn you, but also to tell you something else. The way the Duke looks at you, that's not something common or ordinary. That's genuine feeling, the kind most of us spend our lives hoping to find. Don't throw it away because society is cruel." After Lady Pemberton departed, Elliswyn sat at her window watching London go about its business below. Carriages rolled past, pedestrians hurried along sidewalks. Life continued its ordinary patterns while she grappled with an impossible decision. She could continue to see Magnan's, could allow their relationship to develop into something more, and watch as his reputation crumbled beneath the weight of society's disapproval. Or she could do the sensible thing, the selfless thing, and remove herself from his life before the damage became irreparable. The knock at her door came shortly after noon. Elliswyn opened it to find not Magnan's but a young clerk, carrying a sealed letter. "For Mrs. Harrowmere," he said, handing her the envelope, "from the magistrate's office." The letter informed her that questions had been raised regarding her late husband's death and requested her presence at the magistrate's office the following morning to answer certain inquiries. It was politely worded but unmistakably official. Worthington had made good on his threat. Elliswyn read the letter 3 times, each reading making her hands shake harder. This was it then, the final blow. Even if she withdrew from Magnan's life now, the damage was done. Worthington would pursue his investigation, would drag Charles's memory through every gossip column in London, would ensure that she became a symbol of everything dangerous and corrupting about women who didn't know their place. The question was whether she would face it alone or allow Magnan's to stand beside her through whatever came next. She was still wrestling with that question when the Duke himself arrived, his expression grim. "You've heard," he said without preamble. "About the inquiry?" "Yes. A clerk delivered the letter an hour ago." "Worthington is a vindictive fool, but he's a well-connected vindictive fool." Magnan's paced her small room, his agitation evident. "I've already spoken with my solicitors. We'll challenge the inquiry, demonstrate that there's no legitimate basis for reopening the investigation into your husband's death." "Magnan's, stop!" Elliswyn's voice was quiet but firm. "This is exactly what I feared would happen. Your association with me has created a scandal, and now that scandal is threatening to consume both of us. Then we'll weather the scandal together. No. She stood, forcing herself to meet his eyes. You need to distance yourself from me. Immediately. Make it clear to society that I pursued you, that you were merely being polite, that you have no serious interest in continuing our acquaintance. I won't do that. You have to. Don't you understand? This inquiry will dredge up every ugly rumor about Charles's death. It will paint me as someone who destroyed her husband and is now attempting to destroy you. The only way to protect your reputation is to make it clear I mean nothing to you. But you do mean something to me. Magnans crossed to her, taking her hands in his. You mean everything to me. These past 3 weeks have shown me what my life has been missing. Purpose beyond duty, connection beyond obligation, the courage to choose my own path rather than following the one laid out for me. And I'm grateful for that, truly, but I can't let you sacrifice everything you've built for my sake. You're not asking me to sacrifice anything. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. His grip tightened. Eliswyn, I love you. I should have said it at Devonshire House, should have made it clear from the beginning, but I'm saying it now. I love you, and I want to marry you, and I don't give a damn what Worthington or anyone else thinks about it. The words hung in the air between them, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Eliswyn felt tears threatening, felt all her careful defenses crumbling in the face of his declaration. You can't love me, she whispered. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brave enough to attend a ball where you knew you'd be unwelcome. I know you loved your husband despite his flaws. I know you've survived 3 years of isolation without losing your kindness or your compassion. That's more than enough to build a life on. But society will adjust or it won't. Either way, I'm not walking away from you. Magnans pulled her closer, his voice dropping to something intimate and fierce. I've spent 10 years being the perfect duke, the perfect son, the perfect example of aristocratic responsibility. It's made me respected and influential and absolutely miserable. You've shown me there's another way to live. I'm not giving that up. I'm not giving you up. Eliswyn looked up at him, at the determination in his eyes, at the way he held her as if she were something precious and irreplaceable. She thought of Charles, of how loving him had cost her everything. She thought of the inquiry, of the scandal, of all the ways this could end badly. Then she thought of Lady Morcanthy's words. Life is too short to make decisions based on what other people think is appropriate. I love you too, she said finally, the words emerging half sob, half laugh. I've been trying not to, trying to be sensible, but I can't help it. I love you and it terrifies me. Magnans smiled, that transformation of his austere features that she had come to treasure. Then we'll be terrified together, but we'll face whatever comes next as partners. He kissed her then, a gentle exploration that quickly deepened into something more passionate, more desperate. Eliswyn melted into it, into him, letting herself finally accept what she had been denying for weeks. This was real, this mattered, this was worth fighting for. When they finally separated, both breathless, Magnans rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. Not someday, not when the scandal dies down. Now, as soon as we can arrange it. That will only make things worse. Or it will make them better. Either way, I want you to be my wife. I want the world to know that I've chosen you, that no inquiry or rumor or malicious gossip will change that. Eliswyn pulled back slightly, studying his face. He meant it, every word. He would marry her despite the scandal, despite society's disapproval, despite the very real risk to his reputation and position. It was the most foolish, romantic, impossible thing anyone had ever offered her. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. The announcement of the Duke of Thornwick's engagement to Mrs. Eliswyn Harrowmere appeared in the Times 3 days later, creating a sensation that overshadowed even the Christmas season's usual social spectacles. The magistrate's inquiry into Charles Harrowmere's death, which had seemed poised to destroy Eliswyn's reputation, suddenly found itself without momentum. Investigating the widow of a man who had been dead for 3 years was one thing. Investigating the future Duchess of Thornwick was another matter entirely. Worthington, realizing he had overplayed his hand, quietly withdrew his allegations. but the damage to his own reputation had been done. Society, which loved nothing more than a romantic scandal, decided that the Duke's defense of his bride was proof of exceptional devotion rather than compromised judgment. Almost overnight, Elliswyn transformed from a woman to be shunned into a figure of fascination. Not everyone was pleased with this development. The morning after the announcement, Elliswyn received a visitor who made her discomfort with the situation abundantly clear. Lady Constance Ravenscroft, Magnan's aunt and one of society's most formidable matriarchs, arrived in a carriage that blocked traffic on the narrow Bloomsbury Street. She swept into Elliswyn's modest rooms with the air of someone accustomed to making entrances, her steel-grey eyes taking in every detail of her surroundings with evident disapproval. "So you're the woman my nephew has decided to ruin himself over," Lady Constance said without preamble. "I expected someone more impressive." Elliswyn, who had been anticipating this confrontation since the engagement was announced, kept her voice level. "Would you care for tea, Lady Constance?" "I would care for an explanation. My nephew is one of the most eligible men in England. He could have married anyone, a duke's daughter, an heiress, someone who could bring connections and influence to the match. Instead, he's chosen a penniless widow with a scandalous past and no family to speak of." "I'm aware of what I lack," Elliswyn said quietly. "Your nephew is equally aware." "Then why is he doing this? What hold do you have over him?" Lady Constance leaned forward, her expression sharp. "Did you compromise him somehow? Force him into a position where honor demanded he offer marriage?" The accusation stung precisely because Elliswyn had asked herself similar questions. What did Magnans truly see in her? Why risk everything for someone society considered unworthy? "I have no hold over the Duke beyond whatever affection he chooses to grant me," Elliswyn said. "If you want to understand his motivations, I suggest you ask him directly." "I intend to. But first I wanted to meet the woman who has apparently bewitched him into forgetting every lesson his father spent years teaching him about duty and responsibility. His father taught him to value reputation over happiness, to maintain appearances regardless of personal cost, to never step outside the narrow confines of what society deems acceptable." Elliswyn stood, surprising herself with her own boldness. "Perhaps your nephew has decided those lessons weren't worth learning." Lady Constance's eyebrows rose. "You have a tongue on you, I'll grant you that much." "I have a spine as well, one that's been strengthened by 3 years of surviving society's cruelty. If you've come here to intimidate me into breaking the engagement, you're wasting your time. I love your nephew, and he loves me. That's not going to change because you disapprove." For a long moment, Lady Constance studied her with an intensity that made Elliswyn want to look away. Then, unexpectedly, the older woman smiled. "Good. You'll need that spine in the years ahead. Being a duchess is not for the faint of heart, particularly when you're starting from a position of social disadvantage." She settled back in her chair. "I may not approve of this match, but I'm not fool enough to think I can prevent it. My nephew has made his choice. The question now is whether you're capable of living up to it." "I don't know if I am," Elliswyn admitted. "I've never wanted to be a duchess. I've never prepared for that role or imagined myself capable of fulfilling it. But I'm willing to learn. For Magnan's sake, I'll become whatever I need to be." "That's the wrong answer." Lady Constance's voice was sharp, but not unkind. "You should never become something for someone else's sake. That leads only to resentment and regret. If you're going to be Duchess of Thornwick, do it because you want that life, that position, that responsibility, not because a man loves you." The words struck Elliswyn with unexpected force. She sank back into her chair, considering the question Lady Constance had posed. Did she want to be a duchess? Or did she simply want to be with Magnans, regardless of the title that came with him? "I want to build a life with your nephew," she said finally. "I want to stand beside him as he works to reform his estates and serve in Parliament. I want to create a home where love matters more than lineage, where people are valued for who they are rather than what they can provide. If that requires me to be a duchess, then I'll learn to be the best duchess I can be." Lady Constance nodded slowly. "That's better. Though I should warn you, being the best duchess you can be will not be the same as being the duchess society expects. You'll be criticized, mocked, compared unfavorably to every other woman of rank. Your past will be dredged up repeatedly. Your every action will be scrutinized for evidence of unworthiness. I survived 3 years of that scrutiny without a duke to defend me. I can survive it with one. Perhaps you can. Lady Constance stood, gathering her reticule. I'm hosting a dinner party next week. Small, intimate, only 50 or so guests. I expect you and Magnans to attend. Consider it your first test. You're inviting me to your home. I'm inviting my nephew's future wife to my home. There's a difference. Lady Constance moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Mrs. Harrowmere. My nephew is a good man, but he's been lonely for a very long time. He's hidden that loneliness behind duty and responsibility, convinced himself that personal happiness was less important than maintaining his position. You've shown him another way to live. Don't let him retreat back into his old patterns. She departed, leaving Eliswyn staring after her with a mixture of relief and trepidation. The confrontation had gone better than expected, but Lady Constance's warning lingered. Being with Magnans meant becoming someone new, taking on responsibilities she had never imagined, entering a world that had spent 3 years making clear she didn't belong. Was she truly ready for that? Or was she simply too in love to care about the consequences? Magnans arrived that evening, his expression lighting when he saw her. I heard my aunt paid you a visit. I hope she wasn't too terrible. She was exactly as terrible as I expected, and somehow not terrible at all. Eliswyn pulled him into her rooms, suddenly desperate for the comfort of his presence. She invited us to a dinner party next week, 50 guests. That's Mother's influence. She and Aunt Constance have been conspiring. Magnans drew her into his arms, resting his chin on top of her head. Are you having second thoughts? About the engagement? About becoming a duchess? About any of this? Constant second thoughts. Third and fourth thoughts as well. Eliswyn tilted her head back to look at him. But not about loving you. That's the one thing I'm certain of. Then we'll figure out the rest together. He kissed her forehead. I have something for you. He produced a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a ring that took Eliswyn's breath away. The center stone was a deep blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds, set in platinum that gleamed in the candlelight. It was beautiful without being ostentatious, elegant in a way that spoke of generations of Ravenshaw women who had worn it before. It was my grandmother's, Magnans said quietly. She was considered scandalous in her day, married my grandfather against her family's wishes, refused to follow society's expectations about how a duchess should behave. My father hated that about her, but I always admired it. I think she would have liked you. Eliswyn's eyes stung with unexpected tears as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the weight of it both literal and symbolic. This was real. She was truly going to marry the Duke of Thornwick, become part of a family whose history stretched back centuries, take on responsibilities she barely understood. It's beautiful, she whispered. Magnans, I'm terrified I'm going to fail you. That I'll embarrass you or make mistakes or prove unequal to everything this position requires. Then you'll fail me, make mistakes and learn from them. That's what life is. He cupped her face in his hands, his grey eyes intense. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be yourself. Brave, honest, compassionate. Everything else we can figure out as we go. They spent the evening making plans. The wedding would be small, held at Ravenshaw House rather than in a grand cathedral. Lady Morcanthe was already organizing everything with the efficiency of a general marshalling troops. They would spend their honeymoon at Magnans's country estate in Derbyshire, away from London's scrutiny and gossip. What about after? Eliswyn asked. When we return to London and I have to actually function as a duchess, we'll hire staff to help you manage the household. Mother will teach you about the social obligations and charitable commitments, and I'll be beside you every step of the way. Magnans pulled her closer. You're not alone in this, Eliswyn. Whatever challenges come, we face them together. The week before Lady Constance's dinner party passed in a blur of preparations. Lady Morcanthe arrived daily with dressmakers, etiquette instructors, and detailed explanations of the complex social hierarchies Eliswyn would need to navigate. It was overwhelming and exhausting, but Lady Morcanthy's approach was practical rather than condescending. "You're not trying to become someone else," she told Elliswyn during one particularly frustrating afternoon. "You're simply learning the language society speaks. Once you understand the rules, you can decide which ones to follow and which ones to break." "How do I know which ones to break?" "Break the ones that hurt people. Follow the ones that help them. Everything else is negotiable." Lady Morcanthy smiled. "My son chose you because you have principles. Don't abandon them just to make society comfortable." The evening of Lady Constance's dinner party arrived with the inevitability of a storm. Elliswyn dressed in another creation Magnans had commissioned, this one a deep green silk that brought out the luminous quality of her skin and made her dark eyes seem almost black. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate style that had required the assistance of a maid Lady Morcanthy had insisted on hiring. Looking at herself in the mirror, Elliswyn barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked like a duchess. The question was whether she could act like one. Magnans collected her in his finest carriage, his expression one of undisguised admiration. "You're stunning. Aunt Constance's guests won't know what hit them. I'm more concerned with surviving the evening without making a complete fool of myself." "You won't, but even if you do, I'll still love you." He squeezed her hand. "Remember, these people are just people, titled wealthy, influential people, but still fundamentally human. They put their trousers on one leg at a time, as my father used to say." Lady Constance's townhouse was ablaze with light, its windows revealing glimpses of the 50 guests who had gathered to meet the Duke of Thornwick's controversial bride-to-be. Elliswyn felt her anxiety spike as they ascended the stairs, but Magnans's hand at her back steadied her. Lady Constance received them in her drawing-room, her expression giving nothing away. "Thornwick, Mrs. Harrowmere, welcome. I believe you know most of the guests, Magnans, but your fiancé will need introductions." What followed was a carefully orchestrated gauntlet. Lady Constance introduced Elliswyn to each guest individually, watching with sharp eyes as social niceties were exchanged. Some guests were genuinely warm, curious about the woman who had captured the Duke's heart. Others were coolly polite, their disapproval barely concealed beneath courteous words. Elliswyn navigated it all with the poise Lady Morcanthy had spent the week drilling into her, remembering names and connections, asking intelligent questions, demonstrating that she was more than just a pretty face attached to a scandalous past. By the time dinner was announced, she felt as though she had run a marathon. The seating arrangement placed her between an elderly earl who was nearly deaf and a young baronet who seemed genuinely interested in conversation. The earl required her to shout all her responses, which was mortifying, but the baronet proved surprisingly easy to talk to. "I admire what you're doing," he said quietly during the fish course. "Society needs shaking up. Too many of us are content to maintain the status quo simply because it's comfortable. I'm not trying to shake anything up. I'm just trying to marry the man I love." "Which is itself revolutionary," the baronet smiled. "Most marriages in our circle are business arrangements. Love is considered almost vulgar. You and Thornwick are reminding everyone that there's another way." Across the table, Magnans caught her eye and smiled, a private expression that made the rest of the room recede. Whatever happened tonight, whatever challenges lay ahead, they were in this together. That knowledge gave Elliswyn the strength to continue smiling, continue conversing, continue pretending that she belonged in this glittering world. After dinner, the ladies withdrew to the drawing-room, while the gentlemen remained for port and cigars. Lady Constance settled Elliswyn on a sofa between two duchesses who regarded her with undisguised curiosity. "So tell us, Mrs. Harrowmere," the Duchess of Marlborough began, her tone deceptively light. "How did you manage to capture Thornwick's attention? He's resisted every matchmaking mama in London for a decade." "I didn't manage anything. Lady Morcanthy introduced us at a Christmas ball, and we discovered we enjoyed each other's company." "Enjoyed each other's company." The Duchess of Somerset laughed. What a delightfully innocent way to describe what must have been a quite calculated campaign. "There was no campaign." Elliswyn kept her voice steady despite the rising anger. "The Duke and I became friends. That friendship developed into something more. There's nothing calculated about it." "Of course not." The Duchess of Marlborough's smile didn't reach her eyes. Though one does wonder about the timing. A penniless widow suddenly attached to one of England's wealthiest peers. It's all very romantic, but surely you can understand why some might question your motives. I don't particularly care what people question. Eliswyn surprised herself with her own boldness. I know the truth of my feelings, and so does the Duke. That's what matters. How refreshingly naive. The Duchess of Somerset leaned forward. Let me give you some advice, Mrs. Harrowmere. Being a duchess is about more than wearing beautiful gowns and attending parties. It's about maintaining your family's reputation, managing complex social obligations, and representing centuries of tradition. Do you truly believe you're capable of that? Before Eliswyn could respond, Lady Constance intervened, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. What Mrs. Harrowmere is capable of is none of your concern, Marlborough. She'll be my nephew's wife, which makes her family. I suggest you remember that before you continue your interrogation. The rebuke was unmistakable. The Duchess of Marlborough flushed, but fell silent. Around the room, other conversations had stopped, everyone watching to see how this confrontation would resolve itself. I appreciate your concern for my nephew's welfare, Lady Constance continued, addressing the entire room now. But he's made his choice, and it's a good one. Mrs. Harrowmere has demonstrated more courage and character in the past 3 years than most of us show in a lifetime. She'll make an excellent duchess precisely because she understands suffering and survival. Those are far more valuable qualities than knowing which fork to use at dinner. The words hung in the air. Several women nodded in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. The Duchess of Marlborough excused herself shortly after, taking the Duchess of Somerset with her, but the rest of the party continued with a warmth that hadn't been present before Lady Constance's declaration. When the gentlemen rejoined them, Magnans immediately found Eliswyn, reading the tension in her posture. "Rough evening?" he murmured. "Your aunt defended me against some rather pointed questions about my suitability." "Of course she did. Beneath all that severity, Aunt Constance is fiercely protective of family. And your family now." He glanced around the room. "Ready to leave. We've fulfilled our obligation." They departed shortly after, the winter night cold and clear as they settled into the carriage. Eliswyn leaned against Magnans, exhausted but oddly exhilarated. "I survived," she said. "I actually survived a dinner party with 50 members of the ton." "You did more than survive. You impressed them. Even the ones who came prepared to dislike you left uncertain of their judgments." Magnans kissed the top of her head. "I'm proud of you." "Don't be too proud yet. We still have the wedding to get through, and then the actual business of being married. Who knows what disasters await? Then we'll face them together. That seems to be our theme." The wedding took place on a snowy January morning 3 weeks later. Lady Morcanthe had transformed Ravenshaw House into something magical, with white flowers and candles, creating an atmosphere both elegant and intimate. The guest list was small: family, close friends, and a carefully selected group of allies who had supported the engagement from the beginning. Eliswyn wore a gown of ivory silk that had belonged to Magnan's grandmother, altered to fit her slender frame. Lady Morcanthe had wept when she first saw it, memories of her own mother-in-law obviously overwhelming her usual composure. "She would have adored you," Lady Morcanthe said, adjusting Eliswyn's veil. "My mother-in-law believed that love was the only thing that mattered, that everything else, titles, money, social position, was just window dressing. She and my late husband fought about it constantly. He wanted propriety, she wanted joy. I think she would have said you and Magnans are choosing joy. I hope so. I'm certainly choosing him." The ceremony itself passed in a blur. Eliswyn was aware of Magnans standing beside her, his voice steady as he made his vows. She was aware of the clergyman's words, of the ring sliding onto her finger beside her engagement ring, of the moment when Magnans kissed her and she became the Duchess of Thornwick. But what she remembered most clearly was the look in his eyes when he turned to face her after the ceremony concluded. Pure happiness, uncomplicated by duty or obligation or the weight of social expectation. In that moment, they were simply two people who loved each other, who had chosen each other despite every obstacle society had placed in their path. The wedding breakfast was a cheerful affair, with speeches that were both heartfelt and mercifully brief. Lady Constance, to everyone's surprise, stood and offered a toast that acknowledged Elleswyn's difficult journey and expressed hope for the couple's future happiness. "I did not initially approve of this match," she said bluntly. "I thought my nephew was making a mistake choosing sentiment over sense, but in the weeks since the engagement was announced, I've come to understand that sometimes sense is overrated. My nephew has found someone who makes him happy, who challenges him to be better than he was, who reminds him that life is about more than maintaining appearances. That's worth more than any advantageous marriage could provide." She raised her glass. "To the Duke and Duchess of Thornwick, may your marriage be filled with love, laughter, and the courage to defy expectations." The toast was echoed around the room, and Elleswyn felt tears threatening. These people, Magnan's family, his friends, his allies, had chosen to support them despite society's disapproval. That meant more than she could express. They departed for Derbyshire that afternoon, the journey taking most of the day as snow continued to fall across the countryside. Thornwick Abbey appeared through the gathering dusk, a massive stone structure that had housed Ravenshaw dukes for 3 centuries. Elleswyn stared at it with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "This is home now," Magnan said, following her gaze. "What do you think?" "I think it's enormous and intimidating and probably impossible to heat properly." He laughed. "All true, but it's also beautiful, filled with history, and now it's yours as much as mine. Come on, the staff is waiting to meet you." The household staff had assembled in the entrance hall, 50 people ranging from the ancient butler who had served Magnan's grandfather to the youngest scullery maid. Magnan's introduced Elleswyn to each one, and she tried desperately to remember names and positions, knowing she would be tested on this information in the days ahead. Mrs. Blackwood, the housekeeper, stepped forward with a welcoming smile. "Your Grace, we're honored to have you at Thornwick Abbey. If there's anything you need, anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you, Mrs. Blackwood. I'm sure I'll need quite a lot of help learning how everything works." "We're here to help, Your Grace. This is a big house, but you'll find your way soon enough." That night, alone with Magnan's in the Duke's private chambers, Elleswyn finally allowed herself to acknowledge the enormity of what she had done. She had married a duke. She was now the Duchess of Thornwick, responsible for managing vast estates, supporting complex charitable endeavors, and representing a family whose lineage stretched back to before the Norman conquest. "I have no idea what I'm doing," she admitted as Magnan's helped her out of her wedding gown. "I'm going to make so many mistakes." "Then make them. I'll be here to help you fix whatever breaks." He kissed her shoulder, his hands gentle as they worked the fastenings. "Elleswyn, I need you to understand something. I didn't marry you because I need a perfect duchess. I married you because I need you, your courage, your compassion, your refusal to let society dictate your worth. Everything else is secondary. But what if I can't be what your family needs? What if I embarrass you or damage your reputation or... Then we'll deal with it together." He turned her to face him, his expression serious. "Listen to me. My father spent his entire life trying to be the perfect duke. He maintained every tradition, followed every rule, never deviated from the path society laid out for him. And he died miserable, surrounded by respect, but starved for genuine connection. I won't make that mistake. I'd rather have a messy, complicated, imperfect life with you than a pristine, proper, lonely existence without you." Elleswyn looked up at him, at this man who had risked everything to choose her, and felt something settle in her chest. Love, yes, but also trust. The deep, abiding trust that comes from knowing someone will stand beside you through whatever trials come. "I love you," she said simply. "More than I thought possible. More than is probably wise. Love is never wise. That's what makes it worth pursuing." Magnan smiled, that transformation of his features that still took her breath away. "Now come to bed, Your Grace. We have the rest of our lives to figure out how to be Duke and Duchess. Tonight, let's just be husband and wife." They spent a month at Thornwick Abbey, learning the rhythms of country life away from London's scrutiny. Magnans showed Elleswyn the estates, introduced her to tenants, explained the complex systems that kept thousands of acres productive. She met with Mrs. Blackwood daily, slowly mastering the intricacies of household management. It was challenging, but not overwhelming. The staff were patient with her mistakes, grateful to finally have a duchess in residence after years of the Duke managing alone. And Magnans was always there, supporting her efforts, celebrating her successes, helping her navigate the inevitable failures. They also had time simply to be together, without the pressure of social obligations or prying eyes. They rode across snow-covered fields, explored the Abbey's vast library, sat by the fire in the evenings reading to each other. It was, Ellis Wynne reflected, the happiest she had been since before Charles died. Perhaps the happiest she had ever been. But eventually duty called them back to London. Parliament was in session, and Magnans had responsibilities that couldn't be deferred indefinitely. They returned in early February to find that society had moved on to new scandals, new sources of gossip. The Duke of Thornwick's marriage to a widow was now simply an established fact, rather than a source of speculation. There were still those who refused to accept Ellis Wynne, who cut her at social events or made pointed comments about her unsuitability. But there were also those who embraced her, who appreciated her straightforward manner and lack of pretension. Slowly, carefully, she began to build a place for herself in the world that had once rejected her so completely. Lady Morcanthe became her greatest ally, introducing her to reformers and activists, helping her identify charitable causes where she could make a genuine difference. Within 6 months, Ellis Wynne had established a foundation to support widows left destitute by their husbands' deaths, women like she had been struggling to survive without family support or social connections. "You're using your position for good," Lady Morcanthe said approvingly during one of their weekly meetings. "That's exactly what a duchess should do." "I'm using my experience," Ellis Wynne corrected. "I know what it's like to be invisible, to have society decide you don't matter. If I can help other women avoid that fate, then perhaps something good came from all those years of isolation." The foundation grew quickly, attracting support from unexpected quarters. Even some of the women who had initially opposed Ellis Wynne's marriage found themselves contributing to her cause, unable to argue with the genuine need she was addressing. It gave her purpose, beyond simply being Magnans's wife, gave her a way to matter in her own right. A year after their wedding, Ellis Wynne discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. A child would cement her position as Duchess, would give the Ravenshaw family the heir they needed. But it also meant navigating new responsibilities, new expectations, new ways society could judge her inadequate. "You're going to be a wonderful mother," Magnans said when she shared her fears. "You've already proven you can handle anything society throws at you. A baby will be easy by comparison." "A baby is never easy." "True, but we have staff, family, friends, an entire support system. You're not doing this alone." He placed his hand on her still flat stomach, his expression one of wonder. "Our child is going to grow up knowing that love matters more than tradition, that courage is more valuable than conformity, that choosing your own path is worth whatever price society demands." Their daughter was born on a cold December morning, almost exactly 2 years after that first Christmas ball, where Lady Morcanthe had taken Ellis Wynne's hand and changed her life forever. They named her Morcanthe after her grandmother, and the old lady wept openly when she heard. "You've given me more than I ever hoped for," Lady Morcanthe said, holding her namesake with gentle expertise. "A son who finally understands what matters, a daughter-in-law who reminds me of my younger self, and now a granddaughter who will grow up knowing she can be anything she chooses." The christening was held at Ravenshaw House, attended by family and the friends they had gathered over the past 2 years. Lady Constance served as godmother, having transformed from skeptical aunt to fierce defender over the course of Ellis Wynne's marriage. Even the Duchess of Marlborough sent a gift, a tacit acknowledgement that her initial judgment had been wrong. Standing in Ravenshaw House, surrounded by people who had come to support them, holding her daughter while Magnans stood beside her, Ellis Wynne felt a wave of gratitude so intense it was almost overwhelming. 2 years ago she had been invisible, a woman society had decided didn't matter. Now she was a duchess, a mother, a woman who had proven that love and courage could triumph over prejudice and narrow-mindedness. "Are you happy?" Magnans asked quietly, his arm around her waist. "Terrified and exhausted and absolutely happy," Ellis Wynne said. Thank you for not giving up on me, for not letting me hide from possibilities because I was afraid of being hurt again. Thank you for teaching me that some things are worth any risk." He kissed her temple. "I love you, Your Grace." "I love you too, Your Grace." They stood together, watching their guests mingle, watching their daughter sleep peacefully in Ellis Wynne's arms, watching the life they had built despite every obstacle society had placed in their path. It wasn't a perfect life. There were still critics, still challenges, still moments of doubt and difficulty. But it was theirs, chosen freely and defended fiercely. And that, Ellis Wynne thought, was worth everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story of Ellis Wynne and Magnans, a tale of courage, love, and the strength to defy society's expectations. If you enjoyed their journey from that fateful Christmas ball to building a life filled with purpose and devotion, we would be so grateful if you could take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your subscription helps us continue creating these romantic stories that celebrate love in all its forms. Please leave a comment below telling us what you thought of Ellis Wynne and the Duke's story. Did their courage inspire you? What was your favorite moment? We love hearing from you, and your comments help us understand what kinds of stories resonate most deeply with our wonderful listeners. Don't forget to give this video a like. It truly makes a difference in helping others discover these stories. And please, activate your notifications so you never miss a new tale of romance, adventure, and happily ever afters. Thank you again for being part of our community. Until next time, may your own life be filled with the courage to choose love over convention and the strength to build the life you truly want. The end.